Now, there's lots to talk about in terms of Britain's response to the pandemic this morning. So, delighted to say we're joined by the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi. Really good to see you in the flesh.
Finally.
It makes a lovely change. Look, is the government still being driven by data and not dates in our response?
Very much so. And if you recall, when the Prime Minister set out the roadmap to reopening the economy, he talked about the 4 tests. One is vaccines need to continue to be deployed at scale. Vaccine efficacy, we're seeing some really good data in terms of vaccine protection, and now from Public Health England, the vaccines working against household transmission, cutting it by 50%. 3, obviously, infection rates, because the virus will attempt to infect more people to mutate. And then the 4th is the mutations. So the 4 weeks plus 1, the 5-week period, is really important because there's 4 weeks of data gathering as we open up. We had a big opening this month on the 12th of April of the economy. The data's looking good and positive, but nevertheless, we really have to be careful, because what we don't want is mutations, for example, to blindside us and then have another spike.
And yet Jonathan Van Tam said, didn't he, you know, if people were fully vaccinated, it would be incredibly safe, in his words, for them to meet up and to have some physical contact, all that sort of thing. With that in mind, can't we ease things a little bit more for those people who are fully vaccinated?
So this is why we have to be careful. I think the full quote was, yes, of course, they are incredibly safe if they are fully vaccinated, so 2 doses. At the moment, only 1 in 4 adults have actually had the 2 doses. Now, we're accelerating second doses. April's been second dose month. But let me give it to you, let me sort of give you the flip side of why we have to be careful on this. If the vaccines have 85% efficacy and we vaccinate fully 85% of the adult population, that still is only 72% protection. So there's still quite a sizable percentage for the virus to go after and infect, which is why we've got to be careful. Hence why the 4 weeks of data collection and then 1 week of analysis and then moving to the next step. Now, the good news is we're not seeing any evidence that would lead us to believe that we can't meet the next step in May, the really important step, 17th of May, and then ultimately, obviously, the 21st of June. But it's much better to be careful and follow the data, collect the data properly, analyse it, and then make a decision, than to... We all want to obviously get our freedoms back as quickly as possible, but let's do this properly, let's do it safely.
Well, in terms of that, there's obviously now the talk about a booster, and 60 million Pfizer vaccines have been bought or are being bought. Where does that leave us in terms of sort of cross-vaccination? Is that going to be Pfizer vaccines given to people as a booster, whatever else they've taken in the past?
So for this current deployment, so phase 1, we've just completed the over 50s. Everybody's been offered a first dose. Of course, we're now second dosing, as I explained. That deployment continues. So if you've had Pfizer, you'll get a Pfizer second dose. If you've had AstraZeneca, you get AstraZeneca second dose, and Moderna. We have 2 clinical trials that are important. One is the mix and match trial, which we've put £7 million to fund. That will report at the end of the summer. That will help us for future-proofing and planning of vaccination campaigns. The second one, which Jonathan Van Tam referred to last night, which is the Cove Boost trial, which looks at which booster vaccine single shot would be the best. Now, what we want to do, and my focus at the moment, is to give the scientists as many options as possible for that future-proofing, whether it's Pfizer, AstraZeneca variant, Valneva, the Scottish manufactured vaccine, and, of course, Novavax, which works extremely well against both the current dominant virus, which is the Kent virus, and the South African virus.
I mean, I spoke to Sir John Bell, who's on the vaccine task force, a couple of weeks ago, and he was very much of the opinion, looking at the data he'd seen, that actually mixing the vaccines would give a much stronger immune response.
It could do, which is why we've got the mix and match clinical trials. They'll report at the end of the summer. The booster trials as well, the Cov Boost trials, will also be able to tell us which booster shot would be the most suitable. And, of course, the scientists will then have to decide whether you boost, obviously, if you recall, the most vulnerable to COVID, we began vaccinating on the 8th of December with Pfizer and then 4th of January with AstraZeneca. So I want to give the scientists as many choices of vaccines to be able to use as a booster. They will decide whether we go September or later in this year or early next year, depending on the durability of the current vaccination program. But we need to give them that ability to have as many different vaccines in their armoury to be able to continue to manage the virus. And I think we will begin by next year to hopefully move from pandemic to endemic and treat it like we would do with the flu vaccination program. And the other bit, obviously, that the NHS is planning at the moment is how do you dovetail a COVID boost campaign with the flu vaccination program in the autumn.
Look, I can appreciate you're in a very difficult position because, I mean, your priority, your focus is vaccinating the United Kingdom. But when you're looking at buying all these extra vaccines, so the 60 million doses of Pfizer, when we don't quite know if that's going to be the right approach for everybody, and you say getting lots of these different vaccines on board, when we know there is still this huge global problem, at what point do we start to look at this from Westminster as a global issue that we need to start dealing with?
Really important question. So literally from the inception of the Vaccines Task Force, when the Prime Minister set up the Vaccines Task Force, he gave us two priorities. One, find the vaccines that will work against this virus. So go out and look and find them. Manufacture them in the UK if you can. Contract early if they're not manufactured in the UK and get them here. But the second priority from back in March of 2020 is how do you help the rest of the world? He said, have a plan of how we help the rest. So we're the first country to put £548 billion to the COVAX, which is the infrastructure that's now delivering 40 million vaccines have landed for over 100 countries. So the Philippines and Ghana and Ivory Coast have all been receiving COVAX. The bulk of it, by the way, is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The Oxford team and AstraZeneca are not making any profit on that. It's being done at cost whilst we're in pandemic around the world. So we are doing a hell of a lot to make sure we help the rest of the world. India has historically been there for our NHS. Many colleagues who work in the NHS are of Indian heritage. It's really important that we're one of the first countries to help India. Hundreds of pieces of health machinery that was needed by them, including oxygen concentrators, went out to India. But we're also, through Oxford and AstraZeneca, giving the Serum Institute the ability to manufacture 70 million doses a month for India and other low-income countries.
OK, look, you mentioned the Prime Minister. Can we talk about his current predicament? Sir Keir Starmer said on television last night, with these investigations and inquiries that are underway, this could all be over in 5 minutes, he said, if the Prime Minister just tells us what went on with the refurb of his flat. Why doesn't he do that?
Well, first of all, the Prime Minister has answered umpteen questions on this, including, as your viewers would want to know, did the taxpayer pay for the refurbishment or not? He paid for the refurbishment, unlike previous Prime Ministers. Tony Blair, I think, spent something like £300,000 on refurbishing the flat in number 10 over time. But here's the problem for Keir Starmer, and I listened very carefully to him last night because he did a big sit-down interview with Robert Peston, 10 minutes of that, and P.T. Barnum would have been proud of him. He was the ultimate bandwagoner. Not a single policy idea for an election, important elections coming up in 7 days' time. All he could talk about
but come on,
was this question.
But people could say the same about you, saying, well, you're trying to dodge the issue by talking about their lack of policy suggestions.
Well, we have elections. We have elections in 7 days' time, and people want to know what you're going to do. Are you going to be delivering a vaccine program? Are you going to deliver a levelling up agenda where we're investing $640 billion in infrastructure?
But the Prime Minister has said, as you said, he said repeatedly, I paid for this refurbishment. Well, he might have done in the end. What we want to know is where was the money coming from originally? There's talk of 58,000 coming from one donor, loans from CCHQ. Did any of that actually happen? Well,
first of all, the Prime Minister has appointed Lord Geidt, who was Her Majesty the Queen's private secretary, a crossbencher in the House, was really important. The reforms we've made to the way Lord Geidt can effectively do his job is to allow him to be proactive in his investigation. The Prime Minister will absolutely make sure that he delivers everything that Lord Geidt asks for to be able to conduct that investigation. The Prime Minister has been very clear that he paid for this, that he also followed all the ministerial codes, took advice, and if Lord Geidt, in his investigation, requires the Prime Minister to make any other declarations, then he will also do that.
So that's a commitment, is it? Because ultimately, as it stands, the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter of this own investigation. He could dismiss it. He could dismiss the recommendations. You saying that whatever Lord Geidt comes up with independently will be acted upon.
So this is a really important question. Part of our reforms now allow Lord Geidt to be able to be proactive rather than reactive. All ministers serve with the confidence of the Prime Minister. He's appointed Lord Geidt to look at ministers and ministerial conduct. It's only right. I serve because I have the confidence of the Prime Minister. If I don't have that confidence, I will clearly lose my job. So ultimately, the Prime Minister has done everything in his power to answer these questions. We've got elections in 7 days' time. Labour at the moment are a policy-free zone. I worry because voters will look at Keir Starmer and I think they'll probably be thinking, well, where are the ideas? What are you going to do to better my life? How are you going to give me a job at the end of this pandemic? Are you going to back this country being able to do the vaccinations that it needs, which is important to make sure we come out of this pandemic in as healthy a position as possible?
We will find out what the voters think in a week or so. Well, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.